If there was ever a time for an example of you don't know what the next phone call is going to bring, the BP oil spill was definitely that. I'm going to break it down today and tell you how that call came about to turn into what became one of the largest projects, the largest project I ever personally ran, but probably one of the larger in our industry. There's certainly been some bigger ones, but it was the most interesting, difficult, fun, growing experience I ever had, and I want to share it with you today on the Disaster Podcaster.
Hello, this is Huey Miller. I'm inviting you to join me to listen to my friend Clark Brown on the Disaster Podcaster.
Hey, welcome back to Disaster Podcaster, season number 4, episode number 4. I'm your host today, Clark Brown. I don't have any guests, but we are going to be diving into a really instrumental, large project that I was a part of. And it's got a lot of stories. So this podcast is probably going to be spread across at least 2, maybe 3, depends on where it goes. So the goal of this is to talk about what we're going to be calling the BP oil spill. It was actually called Deepwater Horizon. That was the name of the rig and the setup of the oil drilling that had a catastrophic valve break, pipe break, and dumped hundreds and hundreds of thousands of tons and millions of gallons, billions maybe, gallons of oil into the Gulf of Mexico, which washed ashore across the 4 states that make up the North American line of that borders or touches the Gulf of Mexico, which is Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Florida. Lots of stories, lots of really cool things that happened, lots of interesting, life-changing things. Certainly a lot of complications and really, really some challenging things. So that's what I want to kind of browse through today, kind of tell you how it came about a little bit. Today's focus is going to be like the genesis of that. So I've got some notes here. I'm definitely going to have to work on some notes on this one because I've been working on the plan to create this podcast for a while, and it took a lot of conversations with a lot of people that were there with me. There are some things that I'm not even fully sure that I'm going to share yet. There was a lot of corruption. I'm not here to get people into trouble as much as I am just to share with people that there are a lot of different sides to when you get a really large opportunity and a really big project, and certainly when there's this much money involved, what it can cost people to do and what values get tested and morals and stuff like that. So we're just going to have some fun with it, going to breeze through it. I hope that you get some value out of it. It was called Deepwater Horizon, but we're going to call it the BP oil spill. BP, British Petroleum, was the primary oil company that had contracted Halliburton and Transocean. There was a lot of arguments over who was at fault, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. But I wanted to give you some timelines. This was this event happened. It first occurred on April 20th of 2010. So as of the recording of this episode, we are in May of 2024. So 14 years later, this occurred, and a lot has happened since then around that event. So everyone didn't get involved, especially past, like early on, it was certainly the EPA, it was the Coast Guard, and a few other government agencies, natural wildlife and stuff like that. That is who generally was primarily involved with the BP oil spill, with some of these government agencies, because of the economic and environmental impact that this was having and would have on these regions, highly politicized. This happened on the 20th, and I think in the early first week or so, it was just so much oil and so much going on, just like anything, like on a project. Everyone was throwing efforts at it, but I think they were just gathering information. Can we shut this thing down? I think they realized quickly they couldn't. I don't really know everything that happened. What I will tell you is when I got the call. I will give you a little backstory here. So I was, any of you that are in or have know Atlanta or Metro Atlanta, Georgia, I was living in Northeast Atlanta. And during the month of April, I had been in Rhode Island. There was a mall in Warwick, Rhode Island. Some of you listening to this probably remember that. That was a large project. There was a area-wide flood from a river that flooded this mall, this whole area. And it wasn't a humongous mall, but it was completely affected. I'm talking had several anchor big stores. You know, you had your Macy's, your JCPenney's, your Old Navy, and then you had your common areas and then your ancillary stores, your smaller stores. So we got that call in April, and I had been up there working for 3-ish weeks. It was category 3. It was a lot of demo, a lot of drying, a lot of desiccant, several $1 million of work there between multiple different hired parties. Probably will share some of that story on a different podcast, because that entire event and that entire project with the parties involved with the mall was also unique. It was one of those that I think back on a lot. But that was a taxing job. It was very, we were shorthanded for some reason, and it was all hands on deck. I had a small crew. I was working at the time for Interstate, which is now First on Site. And we had some national accounts up there, and then we signed up some more work in that mall. Had a great team, had some great people. We were up there for the whole time. I'd come back, and the way we usually worked when I was working for someone else, not when you're working for yourself, but you were granted generally a little bit of downtime, you know, certainly depending on the severity of what you just finished. So I'd been granted a couple of days to a week where, hey, go take it easy. We're not going to bother you. And that was usually the case. It was usually when they said they weren't going to bother you, they didn't bother you. You got skipped over on the next deployment or whatever you want to call it. So late April, weather had turned nice. At that time, I did have a motorcycle. I love riding motorcycles, and I had a really, really great bike. I missed that bike, and I was cruising through North Georgia. And when I went on a cruise, it was usually get up in the morning and be gone all day. Not normally overnight. I didn't do a lot of the cross-country things, but through the Georgia mountains, and I was coming across Brownsbridge Road at Lake Lanier. Those of you that are local are going to recognize Brownsbridge Road, which is the northern side, not the very furthest point of the lake, but certainly one of the main roads that crosses the lake, and it's a big bridge. I'd been riding. My phone was in my pocket or maybe attached to something. I don't know, but I'd seen a few phone calls from one of my peers, one of the directors at Interstate, and I had seen his call, and I was just ignoring. I figure it was something that about the billing, about the question. I don't know what it was about. So, but I looked down and I noticed that it had been 4 or 5 missed calls, and I said, "Well, that's pretty. You know, that's not common for Jeff to call like that." So I found a place to pull over. I remember where it was. I remember where I was when I had this phone call, but I pulled over into a little turnoff. I wouldn't say it was a rest area, but it was kind of like a little parking area to where it was like a boat launch and stuff like that. So I pull over, get off the bike, and call him up, and got this attitude like, "What?" He goes, "What do you mean, what?" I said, "Man, I'm just chilling today." He goes, "I get it." He goes, "But we got the big one." And I was like, "We always say that." He goes, No, this is the one." And I said, "All right, tell me more." He said, "Have you watched anything about the BP oil spill?" Again, this was about 8 to 10 days later after, it's all around April 29th. And I said, "Yeah, I'd seen a little bit of it on the news, and it looks like a real freaking mess." And he goes, "Yeah, well, we got the call. Well, I need you to meet me in Mobile at that time." And I'm like, "What? Why?" And he goes, "Man, don't ask me any questions. I don't know either." I said, "What do we have to do with the BP oil spill?" He says, "They need us to help manage 10,000 people." I probably turned a couple of different shades of colors, but mostly would say very pale. And I was like, "Wow." I said, "What do you need?" He goes, meet me in Mobile tomorrow morning. Get on a flight tonight if you have to. Just be there as soon as possible. We've got a contact to meet. I'll send you the information. So I'm like, okay. And I'd been home 2 days, 3 days, which wasn't enough, but it wasn't like I just landed. Which sometimes that happens, by the way. Sometimes you land and you're home in the same day or the next morning you're getting a call or a text or an email. I need you in California or Canada or wherever. So I go home. I, of course, have to talk to my wife, my queen, Amy, and tell her I got a call from Jeff. And she goes, rolled her eyes and says, what did he want? I said, he told me we had the big one. She goes, what is the big one? Same conversation. And I said, I don't know what, but we're asked to go help with the BP oil spill. She says, okay, well, get your bag packed. And I was like, okay. And you have to know right now, and anyone in this business, you have to have a partner, whether you're male or female in this industry. Your life partner, whoever is in your life, friends, family, spouses, kids, they have to be on board with this. This is a crazy industry, and my wife always has. I met her in the very early days of when I was starting this industry. Never knew what it was going to become, but at least when we met, she got it, and this is what I was already doing. It wasn't like I left a stable job and went and started doing this. That would have been a challenge. So he's sending me information. We're not really clear on the picture of it, but we now know a little bit more that what they want. Obviously, we're not going to be doing any drying, dehumidification. It's not a big fire. It's not mold. It's going to be cleaning up the oil that was lapping into the shore. Now, we were watching the sensationalized mass media like CNN, MSNBC, and we're seeing the same pictures of the ducks and the pelicans covered with oil and doomsday. It's the worst thing ever, blah, blah, blah. So we're thinking the oils will be covered with, the beaches will be covered with oil. So, again, this is the image we have. Fly down to Mobile, and I'll let you know here, this is where this weird dichotomy started to take place with the oil spill. It happens to some degree on lots of larger extreme losses, but on this one, there was a lot of incredible urgency and pressure, but a whole lot of waiting around doing nothing. It was so odd. So you don't know whether to turn that on or turn it off. It was dire. We were getting text from our contact, which is the way we came about this was really weird. One of the high level board members at Interstate at the time was sat on the board or had some affiliation with the oil and gas energy industry, and BP was calling anyone they could for help. I found out later that the number of contractors and parties and layers of people involved was pretty substantial. But BP itself they're not made to do shoreline cleanups. They hire contractors. They have their own people. They have contingencies for this, but nothing of this scale. So as you can imagine, they're trying to mitigate as much as they can. And they contacted companies and people they knew that know how to manage and properly carry a whole lot of large-scale efforts and projects, and probably someone to help them share some of the financial obligations that this would take. And that's what it became. So we get into Mobile. We're given an address. We pull up at a building that looks like it was just like it was a retail shopping center. Last year, it looked like it had been empty for a while. It wasn't a real descript big glass office. And we go up, knock on the door. We have a contact name. We're told to come in, sit down. And that's where it began. This was like on a Wednesday. And we sat the rest of that day in an uncomfortable chair. It was myself and Jeff. And then later in the day, one of our VPs flew in. And he was going to be another liaison to kind of just see what we're expected to do. We're getting some information from the board director about what he's hearing, but we're sitting in this kind of musty smelling little office. people coming and going. We could sense the energy of the chaos, the oh shit factor. I'd say about 4 o'clock, our contact stepped out and stuck his head out after, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours. We did leave and go to lunch. We didn't know who to tell we were going to lunch. We weren't going to be there in the lobby, but at this point, we had the phone number of the guy we needed. We'd already left some voicemail. So we went and had lunch and came back. We're just sitting there and trying to make sense of listening to some conversations and really just spinning this around in our head. And he sticks his head out and said, hey, you guys, come back and meet me in the morning. Okay. Oh, my God. So there's a whole day. This is starting to feel like a real cluster fudge at this point. So anyway, we go and check in our hotel, have a big dinner, and just like, what are we doing, blah, blah, blah. So the next day we show up, and our contact says, I need you guys to go over to outside of Biloxi. So you go east. There was a little town where they had a command center set up. Go meet so-and-so. We did. We loaded up in our truck and went over there, and we're going down this little road, and we pull up at this little, it looked like an old house. It was an old building. It had been like some kind of mechanical shop or something, and crowded with cars on the street and on the sides and around. We find a place to park. We walk up. We ask for our contact. He sticks his head out. And I made another podcast about this. This is in our first season. This guy looks at us in the eye, just like living off of coffee and no sleep and just stressed out, hair disheveled. He says, do you guys have any Tiger Boom? And we're like, no. You can listen to that podcast. I think it was episode number 3 or 4. I'll link it down below. We didn't have Tiger Boom. Short story, we waited around 3 to 4 days on and off, a few conversations, kind of getting a better idea of what we were doing there, but no real actionable efforts. And we're sitting here thinking about, what are we doing here? How are we, what's the opportunity? What are we charging? And finally, we have audience with our contact, our second contact. This is our person that was assigned directly to us that was kind of running that stuff. And again, we were in Mississippi. Yeah, so we were in Biloxi, Mississippi, and we were outside of it. Now, command center, command, big BP setup was in Mobile, and that was a bigger setup. They had a big BP headquarters, but we didn't really go there a lot. They had a place in Mobile that we went. Talk about that a little bit later. But we finally start talking about what they need. Once he figured out what we were and what we could provide and what we said we could probably help them accomplish based on what their needs were and what they were struggling with, it started to become really clear that we were just needed for project management. They had tasks. They had orders coming down at all times. They need reactive, adaptable groups that could deploy and facilitate and then be flexible with things and could ramp up if they needed to. Well, that's certainly what we could do. We just didn't really have a clear picture on what that was. So without committing to everything, we told them, whatever you need, we'll be here to do it. We just didn't have any Tiger Boom. Believe me, we looked. After we found out what Tiger Boom was, there was none. That's why he was looking for it, because boom is the absorbent sock material, absorbent floating media devices, or they're not devices, they're consumable that they would put in the water. They were trying to encapsulate and capture as much of this sheen, the oil flow, the oil top level stuff that was coming ashore. And they just ran out of that. I mean, in the United States, it was only so much. They gobbled up everything they could. The manufacturer was making as fast as they could. We started getting a better picture of what we needed. And I would say, again, this is where the hurry up and wait happened. We were sitting there for 3 days waiting on that meeting, and then it just continued into getting a better idea, creating a scope, agreeing upon that, then agreeing on rates. So I was left there by myself to negotiate through corporate what some of our approved rates were. Now, they were giving us rate sheets that they were pretty much happy with everyone. Some of them we had to modify. Some of them we couldn't live like that, but some of them were incredibly generous, way more than we charged on regular jobs. So we really ran some projections on these things and kind of agreed upon, how many people we would need, what assets we would furnish, and they would furnish. They weren't furnishing anything. They wanted an all-in-one solution, and we said that's going to be very expensive. And they said, at this point, don't talk to us again about money. That was mentioned to us at least 4 different times until I quit asking. They say, at this point, you'll have an approval process, but don't ask us about money. So we started on that, and we were over in Gulfport. We were in our hotel, and we had the preliminary staging set up and the preliminary deployment plan on who we were going to need right away. And it was starting small. They were testing us out, seeing where we could get started and how we'd fit. So we're in the first week of May at this point. I'd been there a week and a half, went home for the weekend, came back because but I didn't get too far because they were really really antsy. Lots of last minute phone calls, texts, not much. You know what I mean? Not much going. Not clarity on what it was going to be. So it was everything. At this point, I had been a senior project manager with this company, and I was told during the negotiations that, Clark, you're going to end up being either a or you're going to be the CAT. We call them CAT commander. You're going to be running this thing for us as our face in the oil spill. You'll have a big team that you'll send. Right away, they sent, I was doing the math and the roster before I recorded this. I think it was 11 people. They sent us 11 people from Interstate, from our own company, employed W-2 employees. And they started bringing supplies. So some of that was operations, logistics, box trucks with, PPE for cleaning up stuff. We're still getting some real stuff. Health and safety. I've talked about last season or earlier this season about John Hogan. He was our health and safety officer. He deployed down. This was definitely going to be a big part of his expertise on how to. We were learning that we were going to have to do HAZWOPER 40 training. I had mine, but we had to start getting some more people. They couldn't touch the shore or any other components with oil on it without it. So we were putting plans in place for that. And we got 11 people down there, and project managers, supervisors, different logistical pieces and accounting and admin to help us with start capturing billing. I went back and started billing for, as they told me to, bill for everything from the minute you got the call to come down here. We're all sitting in a hotel. A couple of my supervisors, as this happens on large losses, I want you to know that whenever and we were being told, plan to be here a year. Now, we've heard that before, never quite that, but they said this is going to be a year. Even when we get this thing stopped leaking, there's going to be ongoing activity for a long time. So I told some of the team that arrived there, said, we're going to prepared. If we had a huddle and said, you're here, thank you for coming, but this is a long-term commitment. Obviously going home, but you're going to need to commit some time down there. A couple of people, 2, went to a local fish market, grocery store, and loaded up. They bought a big igloo cooler and loaded up on seafood because we were talking about getting into some more longer stay. We usually rent apartments or houses or something like that, or extended stay hotels. So they thought I'm down here in the Gulf. I'm going to get some seafood. And we're there. And the next morning, I get a call from the national director of ops. And he said, hey, Clark, how's it going down there? Blah, blah, blah. I hadn't talked to him a whole lot. And I said, good. He goes, I got some bad news. I'm like, oh, God, what is this? He goes, Nashville, Tennessee has just flooded. And I had heard a little bit about this on the news. And he says, the Opry Mills and the Gaylord and the Ryman and all these, the whole area underwater. I'm taking everyone that's there except one person. I want to leave you one person. And I'm like, you're going to take everybody of this project that we're about to do? And he says, I get it. Listen, hear me out. But who you've got down there, they are skilled and specialized in structural drying and restoration. What you're doing in the Gulf will not be that. I need the skilled people for doing the work. I get it. I'm a team player. I'm not going to argue. He says, you can keep one person. He goes, but I've already got in mind who that's going to be. So whoever you guess. And I said, well, can I have so-and-so? He says, no, you can't have him. He goes, you're going to get so-and-so. And I said, okay, whatever. And he goes, John Hogan needs to go up to Nashville for a while. He'll come back. I said, all right. At this point, just to put this in context, we had no clue what the BP oil spill was going to end up being from the size and the scope and the volume of it. But I knew it was going to be substantial in the dozens of millions. And I just felt for a moment that I'm just now on an island, that the rest of my team is off doing what we always do. I would have been in Nashville. I would have probably been part of one of the projects drawing a structure. I was honored and really excited about this opportunity because it was so different, and I love different stuff. But I'll tell you right now, just from the original meetings and looking around at what was going on, because we were in this in Gulfport, and the hotels were filled with contractors, environmental contractors, like not really the same thing as we were. These were local companies that do oil spill cleanups. This is their niche. HEPACO was there, Clean Harbors was there. You may have heard those big companies. They're big environmental companies for removing waste. I would say I would tell you I've never felt more like a fish out of water with not being surrounded with the peers that we usually do work with, your Serpro, your Belfour, your BMS Cat, and Cotton, and things like that. None of them were there. We were the only one that was like us that were down there, and as excited as I was, it was unnerving as well. But it was what it was. So we went to Plan B, which was we had to lean heavily into our supplemental staffing, our reach into our Rolodex, if you will. We're no stranger to sometimes we just are out of people, and we would need, of course, general labor and specialized restoration technicians from staffing companies. But we also had agencies where we would get management, supervisor, foreman, up to project management, health and safety, and other positions, support positions. So we leaned into them. Well, they were also busy trying to fulfill the placement for people in Nashville. So we're now fighting over resources. But this was very, very important to my company. We pulled some leverage, and I started getting building out what kind of people I needed, an org chart based on what I knew, and we started sourcing them, and that takes a couple of days. But money's no object. Let's get the right people that are committed to coming down here for a little period of time, whatever that ends up being, and started sending some staffing, some project management and stuff like that. So early on, one of the first little activities we had was setting up what was called Project 40 and 41. It was didn't know why it was called that, but later I found out that was the exit number off of I-10, exit 4041. So they had this 200-acre piece of land off of the interstate that they had leased. And again, BP was coming in and leasing up and buying up and acquiring and securing resources like crazy. But they wanted us to set up a center. Like right now, it was mostly boats going out to the spill, and those boats were coming back covered in oil spillage, and those had to be decontaminated and cleaned and prepped and getting ready. So they asked us to do that. So we were prepping boats. We had to get special licenses. We had to get special insurance because we were working near the water. We were also, this field that we were in ended up, if anybody was ever around this time, if you ever passed by that exit during the oil spill in Louisiana or Mississippi, there were hundreds of boats attached on trailers, attached to pickups or trucks. And these were all on standby, ready to deploy if things were coming up. So that was our first thing. It wasn't long till these things started to grow and grow and grow. We started getting called to go set up another place down in Dolphin Island, which is in Alabama, south of Mobile. They said, you're going to set up, and they would say, deploy a camp. Okay, now this is where I want to tell you what we were providing. When we would set up a command center in a camp, if they called it, it was the management of that, which included not only project managers for the staff, but who to handle logistics, operations. We were running a lot of this stuff decentralized back at, in Fort Worth at Command Center, but we had to have boots on the ground for acquiring and making sure things happen. So we had to set those up. We had to have transportation people that were helping us. We had to get more vehicles, and I could not chase around and look for rentals and get trucks and trailers and boats and ATVs. So I developed an org chart, which is much of how we run businesses in our coaching now. Decentralized command. I ended up having 2 right-hand senior project managers that were split between the several project managers that handled things on. But we had to handle the logistics. We had to have a hospitality person who handled where people were staying, getting paid, things like that. So administrative levels. We had to have health and safety and security. So, we had all these assets that we were bundling and putting everything in one place, all of our vehicles, ATVs, all the tools, all the things we needed to where we eventually were on the shoreline cleaning up oil spill. And which, by the way, when it hits it's not just soupy oil. At some places it was. You saw the pictures online. But it was just balls of tar on the shoreline. We were literally cleaning that up with different tools, but even as minuscule as cat litter-like pole things where we were just sifting. And then there was just lots of decontamination chambers, lots of, what we did with the trash bags, how we handled them, where they got hauled off to. We were all included. We had to figure that out. They would tell us where that stuff could go, but they weren't taking it for us. It's like, you're doing all that. We had a rate sheet. And this really started to pile up what we were each camp. So we eventually went to 4 different states, and we had 8 camps set up, 8 locations. The one in Dauphin Island was at an old Coast Guard watch station. It was literally like an old, it was a building, had been run down for who knows how long. We got told to go there. The building was locked, and we spent a day running around looking for who had the keys to this, figuring out if we were just about to break the door down. We had permission, and then just replace the door and get a locksmith. Well, we found it. We had to get access. We had to get power turned on. When I told you at the beginning of this, I never knew what was involved when I got this call. This was it. But this became the project of all projects for us. I had a lot of support. But again, in the early days, I probably would say most of the month of May, when these early deployments were setting up and we were getting our feet under us, most of our team was occupied with Nashville. You had adjusters there. I didn't have any adjusters. You had in Nashville, you had third-party consultants. I didn't have your typical third-party consultants, but I will tell you, we had oversight and we had regulation. We had auditors, and those got a little heavier later, starting in the summer, because in the early days, it was just everyone trying to figure out what they were doing. We were billing daily. Think about this. You think I would say by summertime, beginning of summer, June, July, we probably had 2,000 people in those 4 states and 8 to 9 locations. Well, Pensacola came later, so it was really 3 states. Pensacola happened in late summer. Florida wasn't really getting hit quite hard yet. It wasn't until the shift in the current. I'll tell you more about that stuff in a minute, or the next episode. But we were billing daily on all these places. So I had to have a lot of administrative control over how many people were there, who was working, because we were having to pay them all. We had all these staffing agencies. We had all these layers of contractors that were working for us. We had to capture their time, their assets, what they had, make sure everyone had housing. And by the way, we were still competing with other contractors doing other things. And Dauphin Island is a resort, kind of. It's like a little town, but it's where a lot of people go on vacation. There are a lot of houses there, but you know what the people want for those houses? First off, they live in a lot of them, but there are rental homes. might have been some hotels, but we just weren't looking at hotels. I will tell you that lodging was, for a while, lodging was a real nightmare. We had a person that was doing that, and it switched a few times, but at one point, the lady I had running it was crying because it was just so overwhelming, so dynamic, so changing every minute. We were in Grand Isle, Louisiana at some point. That was wild, but it's a lot of, it's like a fishing town, fishing village, and they had these stilts, these double wides, single wides, most of them. I don't think, not just double wides, houses on stilts, but most of them were trailer houses, mobile homes. What is it, 1,100 square feet? They were wanting $8,000 to $10,000 a month for those, way more. So there was a whole political, whole regional thing about all the people that lived there were being impacted by this. Their way of life was hurt. A lot of people were fishing, relied on tourism, relied on oil and gas, and that was all put to a standstill to some degree down there around Grand Isle, Fouchon. There was a lot of hate for people that were associated with the BP oil spill. We had no BP signage. We had a badge that said cleanup. There were restaurants that we couldn't eat at. So I know I'm hopping around a little bit. I'm just trying to gather this, but we were billing weekly. Every Monday, we would turn in an invoice package to them to get into the cycle of getting paid every 15 to 18 days. So we just got really good. But I tell you what, by the second month, this thing was cash flowing itself because we were spending a lot of money, a lot. This was it was insane. It was really interesting that it didn't feel as crazy as it was, especially now that I would tell you what the numbers were now. But as we were going through it, it was just another project. And this is what I tell people all the time. It's always just a job to do, and it's people and things. And but getting that billing turned in, the logistics of that, getting information across, what they need. As I get around to end up this part one, I want to stay on the beginning part of this. I had, as I worked for Cotton, which was my first employer in this industry from 2002 to 2008, late 2008, I had eventually gotten my certificate in ICS, Incident Command. ICS is a system of communication for first responders, national disaster. I'll tell you why it came about. I think FEMA. When national disasters happen, all these different agencies, all these different entities have to come together, fire, rescue, water, whatever, government agencies. And they all spoke a different language for a very long time, which means they have different forms, they have different codes, they have different protocols. And at one point, FEMA developed ICS, which kind of streamlined a lot of that. You can look it up. You can get that certification through them. There's levels 100 through 700. But you basically fall into some very structured protocols of how things are done on a national level. Now, since the Coast Guard was involved with this and this area-wide disaster, national, epidemic, state of emergency, it was heavily run by a lot of government agencies. So we fell into that. Didn't know anything about that, but that goes from requesting things. So you had to get requests for. I would get requested. I would get an order coming down from our contact with BP to get us another camp set up, another side project. And those happen all the time. Hey, I need you guys for about 3 to 5 weeks to do this little side thing. I'm probably gonna need 100 people. Blah 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 blah. It was some of it was wild and crazy. Some of it wasn't. Even though they requested for me, I had to go through the procedures to get that approved so that I could bill for it, because auditors were later coming in saying, where's the 213? 213 was a request for a human resource. That's the request for the people that I needed to have and what bill rate and things like that, right? So it's a 213 form, had to outline how many people I needed, who requested it, what they're going to be doing, and then confirming the attachment for the rate sheet that was approved to do that on. And then, and for how long. So I had to come up with the budgetary number projection so they could keep up with with their projections too. I had to have that signed by 2 people at BP and 1 person at this other middle management company called O'Brien's that was in the middle. That was their project management firm, kind of like their auditor. So it had to be signed by, and chasing people around to get those was the task of my logistics and operations manager. I helped fill those out, but I would get them to him. My signature had to be on it, wet ink. So that had to go to BP. So I had runners, I had couriers taking things back and forth wherever I was to Mobile, to the command center, and I had to chase down 2 people from BP. Hard to do because they were really taking a beating in the public's eye, on the media. You couldn't find anyone with a logo or a branding or anything that showed that they were from BP. They were like CIA at that point. You would see them and you weren't sure, but if you couldn't see who they worked for, they probably worked for BP. But we would chase people down. Eventually, we found out that just get someone from BP. There were times when people would just sign something they didn't know what they were signing, but I had their wet ink, and I had to get 2 of them. And then someone from O'Brien's was much easier than mine. So we'd have to turn these in. And then that's 213. A 218 was for things like vehicles, or we had to rent property. We had to actually fill out leases, short-term leases with our name on them. Even though it was BP, sometimes they would provide us with the location, but oftentimes it was like, you are going to be find the place you need to do what you got to do to help us get this thing done. We had a lot of freedom and a lot of cash to do it with, but we were spending a lot of money, and there was a lot of approvals that people were trying not to sign them, but we eventually would chase all those down. I had to learn the communication channels. These were some of the real difficult things. Again, I mentioned earlier, I was a super fish out of water. But I heard something early on, and I'd like to start to wrap it up here. I was having lunch outside of Dolphin at this little cafe with one of our project managers for that region. I was just going to recap of how things were going. Mind you, I was floating between eventually all 4 states. I had apartments in all of them. I spent a lot of time on the road. I was going home a little bit more later, but it was a lot of time. Sitting at this restaurant, we had our badge on, and somebody came over and walked and sat up next to me, about 42-year-old guy, looked like an accountant kind of guy. And he sat down and said, "Hey, how's it going?" I said, "Good." I'll tell you later why I was weary of people. There was a lot of politics going on. But he said, "Hey, I'm so-and-so with BP." Like, okay. And I had heard a few names. I hadn't heard his. And he said, "I'm probably on the ladder of who's in charge of this. I'm probably number 3. And I wanted to, he was just super nice. Like, "You guys are doing great. I know it's trouble. I know you." He goes, "I just want you to know I've heard about you guys. When we didn't know what we were getting when we hired you guys, but this is going to be big for y'all. Y'all are doing fantastic, and we like you because you're not like anybody else that's down here. A lot of these players we play ball with all the time in just smaller stuff, environmental day-to-day operations, cleaning up at plants and facilities." He goes, "But you guys are different. You're so professional. You're keeping your head down." These were like, that's how we look. That's how we saw ourselves. We're not there to like get everything. It became competitive, even from inside of our own corporate office. They were wanting us to gobble up more and more and more of the assigned task between some of the others, including HEPACO, Clean Harbors, and things like that. They didn't do what we do, and we don't do what they do, but there was some crossover, and a lot of people were starting to venture into things that weren't in their lane just to grab some revenue. But this guy told me, and I still have his number. We're still connected on LinkedIn. And he's like, "Here's my number. If you have anything you need, let me know. I know how difficult this has been. I know you guys are fish out of waters here, like I'm using my term. But I want you to know that we need you for a while. And it's business, but it's who we do business with, and this might turn into something bigger for your company and our company and future relationships, wherever this all turns out. So that was a very, very positive thing. But I liked when this gentleman told us, you're not like anybody else down here. You're carrying yourselves extremely professional, while some people aren't, and we appreciate that, and we're going to reward that. So whatever you need, we're going to get it for you. We're going to make sure you have premier position, because there were some less than premier positions. There was also a lot of tiers. Some people were getting chopped at having been, I would call them tier 1 or 2, which is right under BP or really close, becoming subs under people. They were starting to consolidate primaries, contractors, saying, you're now working for Interstate. So that happened with a few companies. It wasn't always met with happiness with those people, and it was sometimes they just had to go away. But I just tell you what, there was a part of me that's like, gosh, you all know me. Who am I to be down here running this? I mean, it was several $1 million a week, several million a week. I'll tell you the BP oil spill for us, just to go ahead and spill the beans as I wrap this thing up. This thing ended up being around $213 million for us, and we weren't by far the biggest contractor down there. There were some others doing some other things. Very profitable. It changed later as they got the spill fixed, closed the pipes, stopped the leak. The pressure was off. The news channels started looking at something different, and the rates changed, started to become less and less profitable, and we started to peel off some of the things that we were doing and start relinquishing those to people that were fighting us to get them at lower margins, but they were okay with lower margins. We weren't there to do lower margins. So it was incredible part of my career. I learned so much. My command center that I set up in Biloxi, Mobile area, we rented a place. My org chart went around the room. There were so many layers of people, and it was always changing. I had someone just in charge of helping me manage all this. So I had a great staff, but it took me everything I had to find the right people and to delegate like a freaking monster, because there's no way I could juggle that installation that way. I wasn't in the military, but I started thinking like, this must be what it's like to have a general with all these troops and platoons and things going on. But we had at one point 1,600 people working for us down there for quite a while. And just do the math. That's a lot of dollars. That's a lot of spending, a lot of moving parts. But we had a lot of drama, a lot of unfortunate things, but we also had some great. We had a lot of those people that were working with us, and I'm going to cut off here and go into the next catch up next week. A lot of people working for us on contract basis end up working for the company full time, because they showed up great. They showed up incredible, and really proved that they were assets to our team. Later, some people did show up from coming back from the Nashville, but the truth was, didn't need anybody else at that point. It still wasn't the kind of restoration project. A couple people needed to come down and did and went through, but this wasn't something we were going to be doing all the time. But basic project management, this job more than anything, and through the rest of my career, taught me how to run projects, whether they're large or small. It's all about the people and the structure and the organization. Identify what you need to do, what you need to do it with, what someone's willing to pay based on what their needs are to get it done, and figure it out. And that's what we did. So that's part one of my BP oil spill. I think this is going to definitely be 2 or maybe even a 3rd episode, because there's some really harrowing stories, but also some really, really cool ones and funny. And that's what I just want to share with everybody. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Before I leave, I'd like to remind everyone listening, we still have seats for our Montana Business Retreat, June 18th through 21st. I'm going to put the link down below. If you can go and you want to bring a second person, reach out to me, klark@hay.com, and talk. I'll give you a break on a second seat or the combination of both. But we'd like to get that thing finished up. This is what we're talking about on this episode for delegation. I'm not going to show you how to run an oil spill, but I'm going to show you the framework of how I delegated to set up to run those kinds of jobs. And this is a delegation workshop, but it's also a lot of relaxation, bonding, everyone sharing what they're going through with their company, creating some real friendships, and just relaxing in the beautiful summertime in Montana. Whitefish, Glacier National Park, some tour time. We're going to have great meals. We're covering the meals for everybody. We had hotel blocks, but that's expired, so you now need to get a hotel. But we have a discounted rate a little bit at where we're staying at the lodge. And that's where I'm requesting everyone to stay because it's so beautiful, and it'll be right there. We can have happy hours and stuff. So if you could, check that out, or anything else. If you want your business to run smoother, if you know you do good work and you just want some organizational help to get the right people in the right place with the right data that's actionable so that you can know where to go next for the next 1, 3, and 5 years, also reach out to us. That's what we do for a living. Don't really push that too much on the podcast, but I want to pay the rent. I appreciate everyone listening. Subscribe so that you can catch these and get alerted about them every time, but they're every other Friday on YouTube or on the Audible version, which is Spotify or maybe Apple or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it. Talk to you soon.